Faster than a speeding bullet.
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
More powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus. Resilient. Highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
Hey guys, Jared Moon here from End of 3 Fitness, and welcome to the Better Humanology podcast. This week, talking to Tim Grahl about his book, Running Down a Dream, Your Roadmap to Winning Creative Battles. Really good book. We really uncover what it takes to run down your dream. Maybe you're someone right now who's trying to carve out 30 minutes at the beginning or end of your day to pursue your passion. Or maybe you're pursuing your passion full time right now. Whatever the case is, he has a lot of practical advice on what the reality of chasing down your dream is and what has happened for him, and I think it will resonate with a lot of you. So without any further ado, here is Tim on Running Down. All right, Tim, welcome to the Better Humanology podcast, man. I'm pumped to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we're going to get started with some challenges. How about a fitness challenge for everybody listening?
So I was actually just talking to a friend of mine about this recently, and I feel like if there is one thing that everybody should work on more, it is their squat snatch.
Yeah.
So I would say whether it's working on your ankle mobility or just your hip flexibility so you get deeper in the snatch, whatever it is, my overall body awareness and ability to move in space just skyrocketed once I got really good at the squat snatch. So I feel like if there's one movement that kind of affects all of my movement now, it was learning how to do that. So this week, anything to get better at that is probably a good move.
Yeah, man, there's so many facets to that lift. It's like golf, you know. You never master it, but you can practice and get better at it for the rest of your life. Yeah.
Well, like today we were doing a throw at jiu-jitsu where you have to snap somebody up and then back down really fast. And that's a snatch where you're like going full speed up and then you have to change direction and go down at full speed. And I was about the only one in the class that got it quick because I know how to do that. I do it every week at CrossFit.
That's awesome. Awesome. All right, man. How about a mental toughness challenge? So
this one, I feel like this is for me outside of fitness is the thing that so for a long time, I would seek out really smart people and I'd ask their advice and then they'd give me their advice and then I would come up with all the reasons why their advice doesn't apply to me.
Right.
And I realized it was because my own insecurities were coming out, right? So I would ask advice, but then I'd get embarrassed that I didn't already know the answer. And so I'd start giving all these excuses. So for me, the thing that I constantly do is I'll go to somebody who's really smart in whatever thing I want to get better at. And I ask them to give me complete, unvarnished, blunt advice on what I'm doing wrong and what I could do better. And then my rule is I'm not allowed to argue at all. The only questions I can ask are clarifying questions about what they want me to do. But then my rule is whatever they tell me to do, unless it's immoral, illegal, or unethical, I just do it without asking questions. And it's always hard because the things they point out, I start to get embarrassed and I feel like I should already know that or, all of those things. But every time I just keep my mouth shut, like force my way through that criticism and then just follow their advice, it always turns out good for me. But it's definitely a mental toughness thing, especially for somebody like me who gets embarrassed easy that I don't know what I'm talking about. It's always really hard for me to kind of stick through that time where I want to argue and just keep my mouth shut and do what I'm told. And that has, the biggest kind of, upticks in my life of things going right are when I've done that and just follow the advice.
I think that's awesome advice. And what comes to mind is it's something that it's a struggle for me too, but I'm sure you've listened to other podcasts where in my opinion the host talks a lot more than they should. And I really like to take your approach, like you just said, to just shut up and listen to whoever the guest is, like yourself. Like I'll do very little talking after, we really get into things. And I learned so much more that way, as opposed to trying to be like, oh yeah, well, here's my 2 cents on every single thing you said. We learn so much more when we just listen. And I think that's phenomenal advice, but the ego does get in the way, right?
Right. Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, how about a book recommendation?
So I have 2. Can I sneak 2 in?
Yeah.
Okay. So on the kind of creative side, I recommend The War of Art to anybody that hasn't read it. Full disclosure, it's by the guy Stephen Pressfield. I help with his publishing house who publishes The War of Art. But I loved this book long before I ever met him, and it was a book that when I was really in the depths of wondering if I was going to make it, I would read it and it would make me feel like I could keep going. So it's about overcoming creative resistance. It's called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. Just a classic book now, just one of the best books about following your passion and putting your art in the world. On the fitness side, probably the most life-changing book I've ever read is Becoming a Supple Leopard by Kelly Starrett. When I first started lifting heavy and doing a lot of working out for the first time, I got hurt, and it was because I was doing the movements wrong and I wasn't mobile enough. And so I bought the Supple Leopard and I just went page by page and learned how to do all the movements correctly, I got a lot more mobile, worked really hard on becoming more mobile. And now I've been doing CrossFit for 9 years and I haven't gotten hurt. So, and I think it comes down to I move correctly. So that is it's definitely the most life-changing book on the fitness side.
Yeah, man, learning how to, I forget Kelly's actual, like every human should be able to perform basic maintenance on themselves, something along those lines.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely true. I think if you know how to kind of fix yourself and maintain yourself, you're going to be injury-free for a very long time. You said, how long have you been doing CrossFit?
9 years.
9 years, no injuries, man. That's impressive.
Yeah. Well, I got my one injury not long after I started because I was doing a movement wrong. I was hyperextending my back when I was pressing overhead. And that's when I got hurt. So I was out for a couple of weeks. And that's when I bought Supple Leopard, started watching his videos, and just became like extremely rigorous with moving correctly. And I found, besides like tweaks or like ripping my hands because I did too many muscle ups or something, like I've not had a significant injury since making sure I'm mobile and then making sure I move correctly. So yeah, definitely. I feel like learning how to move correctly because I'm 37. I'm not trying to become, a world-class athlete, right? I just want to move well, be in shape, and live a long time. And so every time I train, I want to be able to train tomorrow, right? So anything that I do that I get hurt, it knocks me out of being able to train tomorrow. And so I feel like learning to move correctly, making sure when you're doing lifts or you're doing, pull-ups or you're climbing a rope or whatever it is, learning to do it correctly so you don't get hurt so you can train tomorrow.
I think that is really sound advice for any athlete listening right now. That's a great approach to physical fitness and movement. All right, Tim, let's hop into it, man. I'm excited to. So I read your book, Running Down a Dream. I think it was really great, which led me to reading selling your first 1,000 copies as well. And or should I say listening to them too. I am a big audiobook fan. So I'm interested to hear it all, man. Take us back as far as you need to in your history, and bring us up to today and what you're most passionate about. I obviously have a few questions about the book, but I would love to just get a little more background on you.
Yeah, so I went to school. I mean, if we go all the way back to when I went to college, I had this idea that I would get a good degree, get a good job, and just do that for the rest of my life. And so I went to college, started working on a degree in computer science, graduated with that. So I, software developer, pretty easy to get a good job. Got my first job out of college, and I hated it. And so I started kind of couple side businesses. I'd freelance, and I started some blogs in the cycling industry. And I reached this point where I got offered a job at where I used to live in Lynchburg, Virginia. There is this plant there. It's like a nuclear plant, and they have government contracts and all this kind of stuff. And my wife's uncle has worked there his entire career. And it's one of those places that you can get a job and you can stay there for 30 or 40 years. That's rare nowadays, but it's one of those places. They pay really well. They needed software developers. I made it through the first 2 rounds of interviews, and then I just walked away because I knew that's not what I wanted. I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew it wasn't that. And it wasn't about a year later, I ended up quitting my job to strike out on my own because I really wanted to build something of my own. And, that's what led to everything that is in the book of just, running into obstacle after obstacle when I have this idea of a life I'm trying to build and work I'm trying to do. And I kept running into obstacle after obstacle, trying to run down this idea of what I wanted. And so, so my oldest son just turned 13. And so next month will be my 13-year anniversary of quitting my job, because I quit 2 months after my first son was born. And I tried lots of different things, and some of them worked, most of them didn't. And eventually finding some success, and then trying to figure out, why I still wasn't happy, and having to wrestle with, I finally got this thing I thought that would make me happy, and I still was just as miserable as ever, and having to switch my understanding to understand that it's much more about enjoying the work than looking for any kind of outcome. So that's like a really short version of the last 13 years and what's in the book and everything. But now it's, a lot of what I'm focused on is I do a lot of writing now. I work with a lot of writers, helping them become better at their craft, become better at marketing so that they can get their work out into the world. And I just really enjoy helping creative people, overcome those obstacles, those, very practical obstacles of like, how do I, get more people to buy a copy of my book, and then some of those more kind of existential obstacles about the big questions about why I'm even doing this creative thing in the first place. And so I'm always just looking for opportunities to help people in those different realms.
And I'm sure there are a lot of people listening to this who probably feel like they fit in some sort of situation that you were describing, how maybe they're not in a job that they absolutely love, or maybe they want to, do something that they're a little bit more passionate about. I'd love to hear your advice to them if they're kind of sitting on the ledge right now.
I mean, it just depends. I feel like the biggest thing is to do whatever you need to do to not let the dream die. I am not an advocate of like, burn the ships, quit your job, and then find your way, because that's what I did, and it really sucked. And there's a lot smarter ways to go about doing things. I had a friend who had been building this side business while he had a full-time job, and I kept saying like, why don't you quit and just do that full-time? He's like, no, it's not ready yet. And I was like, he's like, I'm still saving money, I'm still building it up. And I thought foolishly that he was just putting it off. I mean, I was in my early 20s at the time, and I thought he was just putting it off, and he was kind of being cowardly, and he just kept like, little by little building it. And then when the time came, he had so much leverage in his job that he negotiated to coming in 1 day a week and still getting half his salary. And he had built his side business up to where it was more than his salary. So he was making 150% of his income working like half the time. And so like that's the way to do it. Yeah, I just got sick of my job and quit one day. And so but the other side of that is I see a lot of people that decide that their dreams kind of silly or stupid, or they believe their parents when they tell them that, there's better ways to earn a living, or, keep your day job, all those kind of bullshit things. And so my thing to people is like, whatever that passion is inside of you, like your job is to keep that flame alive. And in fact, putting too much financial pressure on it too early can destroy it. And so what I recommend is just, starting to arrange your life in a way where you can continue to run down your dream, even if it's not your full-time job, even if you're in a job you don't really like, figuring out how to arrange your life in a way that it gives you the space to do that. And for a lot of people, it's really the first step is admitting you actually want this thing. I mean, I still struggle with this, right? So I've been doing book marketing for, over 10 years, and I'm really good at it. I'm one of the best in the world. I've worked with some really well-known authors, launched tons of successful books. I have 2 books on the subject already, and the smart thing for me to do would be to keep going in that direction, right? Like that's what everybody would give me advice to do, which is like write a 3rd book on it, keep going, keep getting bigger and bigger clients. And I'm just realizing like, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to do what I wrote about in Running Down a Dream. I mean, even writing the book was not the best business decision, but it's what my new dream is. And so that doesn't mean I'm like shutting down my business and not doing anything anymore, but it does mean I'm carving out more and more time to do this new thing. It doesn't make any money yet, or very little money. It's not in any way going to sustain my life in the short term, but I start arranging my life so that I can keep that flame alive and keep kind of slowly building it. And so I think that the 2 biggest mistakes that people make are, one, just letting their dream die. I see that so often, and you see this, honestly, you see it in people my age, 37, 40 years old, where they realize like, oh shit, I traded something 15 years ago that I shouldn't have traded. The other is going too fast, of like getting impatient and pushing too hard on something that's not quite ready. And so I think, finding a way to do something that is sustainable for a long term so it can grow on its own is the best way to go about it.
Now, if anyone does start to pursue any, let's just say if they're running down a dream, well, to keep it in that terminology, and you mentioned the book, The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. So anyone who begins on this journey will meet resistance at some point. You've met it, I've met it, and if anyone has not met it yet, they will. So I'd love to, if you could help describe resistance for everyone listening, and then maybe talk a little bit about how you overcome it, and maybe we could get some takeaways from that.
Yeah, so resistance is the force that keeps you from doing the work you're supposed to do, right? So Steven Pressfield, I forgot I should memorize it, but it's basically what that negative force that keeps you from doing your art. Now, the definition of art is very broad here, whether it is teaching or painting or writing or even starting a business, like what the thing that you're supposed to be doing, that when you're all alone and your mind is free, that thing that you should be doing, that is your art. And then resistance is anything that keeps you from doing that. And when we talk about these things, I like to talk about them as if they are real sentient forces, right? So we use terms like the muse, and I think about resistance as an actual like force that's working against you doing the thing you're supposed to do. And so it can be as simple as the voices in your own head telling you you're stupid and silly for ever thinking this is possible. It could be the people in your life saying those things out loud or inferring those things. It could be the fact that you overslept this morning instead of getting up early to write. It could be it's whatever that force is resistance. And the whole thing about resistance is that it's a wily foe, right? So once you learn how to beat it in one way, it reshapes and comes after you another way. And it's one of those battles that is a never ending battle. You never reach a point where you don't deal with resistance anymore. I've worked with, authors and creators that have decades of success behind them, and they still deal with resistance. Sometimes it gets worse the more successful you get. And so I think the number one way to start fighting resistance is to start looking for ways to tell yourself the truth. A lot of times, I like to say that resistance really grows in the dark. And anytime you throw light on it, it immediately starts to retreat. And so I think of things like I journal a lot. So once you start writing down all the thoughts that are in your head and then you go back and read them, you realize how crazy you are. You realize how you believe a lot of evil stuff about yourself. Things that I deal with are, you're a loser, you're never going to make it, why would you ever think you could do something like this? And those are always playing in the background, but once you actually write them down and then you look at them, you're like, oh my gosh, I think I hate myself. And so, starting to tell yourself the truth about what's going on in your head, also being really honest with yourself about how you're spending your time. I had a pastor one time say, you can tell me you value things, but I could check your calendar and your checkbook and see the truth, right? So you can say, oh, I love giving money to, whatever charity, but if I look at your calendar and I look at your checkbook, I'll know the truth. And I feel like that about people running down their dream. I work a lot with writers, and you'll talk to people and you're like, they talk about, they want to be a writer, they dream about being a writer. And then when you really look, if you followed them around for a week, you would never know that they wanted to be a writer because they never wrote anything. Now and what they say, and what you'll say is, well, I'm too busy. But if I looked at your schedule, I would be able to see how much time you're watching Netflix. I would be able to see how much time you're reading the news and getting angry about whatever's going on in Washington. I would be able to see how early you get up. I would be able to see what you do during your lunch break. I would be able to see what you do at night. And I would be able to see a lot of time that you're probably wasting that you could be doing something else. And so I have like this whole exercise I go through to really get honest about how I'm using my time. And I just write down, I do this every once in a while. I haven't done it in a while, but for years I did it on a regular basis where I would literally write down every single thing I do in a day, whether it was going to the bathroom, eating lunch, making lunch for my kids, taking them to school, going to bed at night, reading before bed, watching TV, every single thing I do in a typical Monday through Friday day. And then I would cross out everything I didn't absolutely have to do, right? So I don't have to read before bed. I don't have to watch TV. I don't have to check social media on my phone. I don't have to check the news. I don't have to watch the news. I don't have to, I don't even have to eat lunch with my friends, all this stuff. And then I'd live like that for 5 days, just 5 days. And the first time I did it, it's like 6:30 at night, and I'm literally sitting up in my room staring at the wall because I have nothing to do because all of my distractions are gone. And then all of a sudden, this idea that I'm too busy to write, I'm too busy to run down my dream goes out the window because I see the truth. And so my thing in the early stages of fighting resistance is almost always, you're probably lying to yourself. You're probably lying to yourself in a negative way where you're telling yourself, it'll never happen, you can't do it, why you, all those things. And you're lying to yourself in a negative way as well. Or the other side where you're saying, well, I'm too busy, I don't have time, I can't do that. But if I really followed you around and looked at your life, I would see you probably have plenty of time. You could put some more resources into that. So that's, to me, always the first step in fighting resistance, is figure out where your believing lies.
Now, in your journaling process that you mentioned, where you kind of, you're kind of, putting down your self-talk. Do you ever intentionally practice changing that self-talk?
Yes. So I stole this one from a guy named Zig Ziglar, who was just a world-renowned motivational speaker. He's now passed, but he has, I would highly recommend going to Audible and just buying everything he's ever done on Audible and listening to it. But one of the things that he recommends is doing a daily affirmation. And if you just Google Zig Ziglar's daily affirmation, it's Ziglar, you'll find a PDF of it. And he recommends reading it like twice a day while looking in the mirror, right? And it's all these affirmations like, I'm a hard worker, I am prompt, I am well groomed. Like it's really long. And so I had heard him recommend this off and on for years. And then finally one day I decided to give it a try. And I didn't even make it through the first paragraph before I started crying, because I felt like it was all lies. And that was when I really started realizing how much I hated myself, because I couldn't even bring myself to say anything good about myself. And so I did that for 30 days, morning and evening. So I did it 60 times over 30 days. And it was the first time I started, it took me about 15 days to stop feeling like a liar when I said it. And then by the end of that 30 days, I started to actually believe it was true. And what I realized is that you unconsciously go towards the thing that you believe. One time when I used to mountain bike a lot, and there was this little bridge over a creek, and it wasn't even a bridge, it was a dam, and it was only about 6 inches wide. And me and my buddy Mike were always really scared to ride over it. It was only about 6 feet off the ground, but that's far enough to get hurt. And we were always afraid to ride over it. Well, I read this article about how when you ride over something like that, you should always keep your eyes where you're going, right? So on the other side of the dam versus down at your tire. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to try it today. So I started riding across it, and I kept my eyes glued to the other side of the dam, and I just kept pedaling, and it was terrifying. I desperately wanted to look down at my wheel, but I just kept my eyes there, and I rode all the way across it. And then I looked back in time to see my buddy Mike about halfway across the dam, staring down at his front tire, going back and forth wildly, and he tipped over. He ended up breaking his ankle really bad. And what I realized is that's these thoughts. Like if you fundamentally believe you're going to fail, if you fundamentally believe you're a loser or that you're broken, you will always go towards that. That is the thing that when you will unconsciously bend towards. And what's really damaging about it is it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy, this cycle of like, you believe you're a loser or you believe you're a failure. And so you unconsciously go towards failure so that it reinforces the belief. And so it's not until you start changing these fundamental ways that you see yourself that you start bending a different direction. And what was surprising to me is I always thought of these things as kind of like woo-woo things. Like, I don't know how else to put it, just these kind of like soft, kind of like, oh, you've just got to believe, And I found it's much more practical than that. Like, you don't have to try real hard. Just do the thing. Get up twice a day, get in front of the mirror, read the affirmation every day for 30 days, and it will start to change the way you feel, start to change the way you think, and you'll start thinking of yourself as a winner instead of a loser. And lo and behold, you'll start winning. it's a little fascinating. It's much more blunt and straightforward than I used to think.
In being a writer, I think there's a lot of skepticism involved, especially, that maybe a little bit more in the journalism type world. You have to maintain a certain level of skepticism. And I think that's true in just researching a book or, trying to write certain things, trying to, if your idea is good or bad, what are the holes in it, all of that kind of stuff. But it sounds like that mentality of being skeptical, if it translates to your personal identity and you don't truly believe in who you are, you have this level of skepticism about yourself. Have you ever found that there's some sort of connection there between the work you're doing as a writer and how you actually feel about yourself? Like, not necessarily from a fulfillment standpoint, but, more of a tactical in what it takes to be a writer versus what it takes to believe you can actually be successful.
Well, I'm not sure if I totally understand what you're asking.
Okay. Let me try and rephrase it a little bit. So in any sort of creative pursuit, I think that you have to absolutely believe in what you're doing, be a true believer in that, but there takes a certain level of disbelief, right? Like you have to, I think a good scientist, if you will, or a good person has to kind of poke holes in where they might be bad. Whether it's your first draft of writing a book, you're like just trying to poke holes in everything, right? To make it the best you can possibly be through that process. And so what I'm asking is that I think that is what probably makes you really good at what you do and other people really good at what they do. But I also think that there's some sort of negativity that brings to your personal life. And I'm curious if you find that to be true.
Yeah. So in Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert talks about how you have to believe wholeheartedly that what you're working on is the most important thing that you've ever done, while also at the same time believing it doesn't really matter that much. And my therapist often tells me, he's like, the mark of emotional health is being able to believe two competing ideas at the same time, right? So two things that there's no way they can both be true. You have to believe them both at the same time. And I think this applies in this area too, of yes, I want to constantly be skeptical of my work and look for how it could be better and make it better, while at the same time believing that I have everything I need to make this better. I think a big part of this too is separating out yourself from your work. Those are two different things. And too many times those things get coupled together where we feel like if this fails or if this doesn't achieve the level of success I want, then I therefore have failed or I am a failure. And there's a pastor named Dallas Willard who I really respect. He's passed too. I apparently only read dead guys, but he talked about how you have to separate effort from earning. And the way that he put it was, you do everything you possibly can, but realizing that your job is the effort and God's job is the earning, right? And now I anymore wouldn't use the word God, but I would say, look, you can do everything you possibly can, but you have no control over the result. Even somebody who is a book marketing expert, right? Who my job is to sell books. When I was writing my book, I had to put everything I could into the book, realizing the book may ultimately fail, as in like not sell a lot of copies, but that doesn't mean that I didn't do my job. My job was to show up, say what I had to say to the best of my ability, and then I'm done and I move on to the next project. And so I do think you have to have both, right? We've met those people that are so like blindly confident that all of their work is shit. And then you meet the people, I have a friend who's been working, I'm doing air quotes here, working on his book for like 5 years. And he's so critical of it that he can't ever let it go. And so there's a balance. And so I think learning, and for me, how I do it is I work hard and I have people in my corner that tell me when I'm ready, right? So I have an editor, his name's Sean Coyne, and my job is to keep churning on my next book until he says it's ready. And I just trust him. He's been doing it a long time. He knows when something's ready. And so if he says it's not ready, I go back into the workshop and I work on it. And when he says it's ready, I'm done. And so I really try, and at any point in those times, if he says your writing is not very good, that doesn't mean I'm not very good. That just means my writing isn't yet where it needs to be, but I will get there. And so I think it's important that we keep our self separate from our work. I've worked with those artists that those things are intermingled, and the problem is that they never are happy. Even if they, hit, if they're a writer and they hit #1 New York Times best-selling book, they're still not happy because all they do is dread the next project. And so it's really important to decouple your effort and what comes of your effort. Those are two different things. You have complete control over the first one. You don't have a lot of control over the second one.
I think that's a great answer. I mean, it's kind of like sports, if you played like your best game, against a very worthy opponent, and there was no bad call by the ref, there was nothing that went wrong, you didn't mess up, but you still lost the game, it doesn't really matter. You put in your absolute best effort, and the result doesn't matter as much. You can always get better next time. Now, what you're saying isn't necessarily that you lost. It's just a matter of kind of separating the outcome from the kind of work you put in. I think that's phenomenal advice, and I really appreciate that. All right, now one thing I am curious about is in the book, and you kind of alluded to it at the start of this episode, this interview. You said, you kind of found success, and by all definition and sense of the word, you did. I mean, you'd worked with some really high-end people, hit the bestsellers list, all these things, and truly were successful, but you weren't happy. And I would love for you to kind of talk about that. You mentioned also at the beginning, success isn't the thing that makes you happy. It's more about like the enjoying the work. But I would love to, there's so many people right now caught up in this. I've been caught up in it, and it's human nature. But any point you have that could steer us in the right direction about separating this always chasing the next shiny object or the next thing as opposed to trying to enjoy the journey, and how we could do that.
I think it comes down to what you believe about yourself. I was raised to believe that I was broken, that there was something wrong with me that was broken, and that it needed fixing, and I needed something outside of me to fix it. And so then it became about, if I can get here, then that means I'm good enough, right? If I achieve this level of success, then nobody can look at me and say, well, he's no good, or he was a failure, or he should have never set out to do this. And the problem with that is that anytime you're looking to an external, something outside of yourself to validate, you're on really shaky ground. Because this really sad thing is that even if you get it, you now just become afraid that you're going to lose it. Or all it does is raise the bar so high that you feel like you have to meet that every time, right? So I mentioned before, I've worked with authors that they desperately wanted to hit the New York Times list, and then they do, and then they put so much pressure on themselves that every book they do now has to hit that as well, that they become blocked and can't write their next book, right? And it just consumes them. So even achieving the thing that you think will finally be, enough, or finally be the thing that proves to everybody, including yourself, that you're good enough, you've achieved it, you've done it. Once you get it, it's so fleeting. It's like fascinatingly fleeting. I've worked with authors that like all they wanted to do was be able to like walk into a real bookstore and see a copy of their book. And then afterwards, they're like, it is the most anticlimactic thing that's ever happened in my life, you know? And so for me, I had this picture in my head of like, once I reached this point, I would finally feel good enough. I would finally feel like I was worthy of people's attention, that nobody could look at me and think of me as a loser anymore, including myself. And I reached this point where I had achieved everything I had set out to achieve. I had worked with the clients. I had about a 6-month run of more success than pretty much any book marketing expert ever in my field. And I had come out with my own book, and it had sold way more than I thought it would. And I found myself, I was at a conference called the World Domination Summit in Portland, and I had gotten invited to one of the cool parties because I was, friends with one of the cool people because of all the work I'd done. And we're up on top of a hotel. And I remember like looking out over downtown Portland and thinking, oh no, like it's still here. Like that feeling is still here. And, then that actually kicked off a long road of self-destruction for a while that finally led me to a place where I had to realize, like, again, anytime I'm looking outside of myself to validate myself, to tell me I'm okay, to tell me I'm good enough, to tell me I'm not broken, is the problem. That all of that has to come from inside of me. I have to believe all of those things and walk in all of those things independent of what's going on around me. So whether I'm making a bunch of money or I'm losing all my money, or I'm launching successful products or launching failures, I'm the same. I'm fine and I'm okay. And so what I realize is that the true joy isn't ever from achieving something. And I mean, we should all learn this lesson, right? We've all seen like the rock stars commit suicide, and like the people that shot to success, like, end up as alcoholics, like we see it, but we still don't believe it, that achieving these external things will not be the thing that finally fixes us, that finally makes us feel okay. And that has to come from inside of myself. And so now it becomes the true joy, the true like dream is the fact that I have a dream to run after. Like I feel like now the only thing I'm afraid of is one day waking up without a dream. And so that's why at the very beginning I talked about like the number one thing to do is whatever it takes to keep the dream alive. Because I get scared. I still feel, just because I've had success in the past doesn't mean my next venture is going to be successful. Maybe I got lucky and this one will be a failure, or maybe, who knows what's going to happen. But the fact that I woke up this morning and I have a dream of the thing that I want to run down, and today I'm going to just move a little bit closer to it. Like I didn't, I had a pretty weird day. I didn't get a lot done, but like I sent those 2 emails that I needed to send to get my dream a little further down the path. And that's enough because I'm going to wake up tomorrow and do it again. And finding joy in that is the only success. There is no other success.
Awesome, man. All right, we're going to move to the quick fire questions of the show. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What's the hardest workout you've ever done?
So this was a hard one, especially because in CrossFit, there's so many like named workouts that you do over and over. And so I wanted to say like the 12 Days of Christmas, which is like this 30-minute workout. Or no, it's longer than that. Anyway, but I would say the hardest one the hardest workout for me is Fran, which is 21-15-9 of thrusters and pull-ups. And, my quickest time I think is just under 4 minutes. And no matter it destroys me to the point that usually I'm like coughing and can barely talk the rest of the day. So that's my hardest workout because it's the one I dread the most.
It's a nasty one, especially if you do it right. All right. In your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
For me, it's jiu-jitsu. I started doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu a little over 2 years ago. And, I deal with some anxiety and claustrophobia. And so having, a 200-pound sweaty man laying on my face is pretty unsettling. But for me, having to be fully mentally engaged while being fully physically engaged, which is what it takes to be good at jiu-jitsu, has probably been the best thing for me to be able to, have somebody actively trying to choke me or actively trying to, take me down to the ground and fighting physically while keeping my head calm and neutral so that I can pay attention and make the next move. That's probably been the best activity for my mental toughness.
Now, have you found any translation between your ability to keep calm and jiu-jitsu translate to your CrossFit workouts?
Yeah, I've found that I find that on the longer workouts, I'm able to, I would always reach these places where I would just kind of slow down. And so I found that I'm able to, 2 breaths before I normally would, I pick the bar back up, or just a couple beats before I normally would jump up and grab the bar, I jump up and grab the bar. Honestly, though, it translates more into my personal life where, if like my kids are doing something crazy and screaming or doing whatever, it's like I'm able to like stay calm in those moments and think instead of react. Or like in traffic, if somebody like pulls out in front of me, I don't get angry anymore. Like I'm able to like stay calm and react instead of like have all that anger come up. So I feel like it mostly it's again, I feel like it helps you separate the external and internal, right? So again, while something crazy is going on outside, you can stay calm mentally, because in jiu-jitsu, if you don't, it's immediately over. So it teaches you like literally while somebody's choking you and like the lights are starting to go out, you're still able to like pay attention to what's going on and make a good decision about what to do next.
Now, if you could only have one piece of equipment to train with for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Kettlebell, for sure. I feel like it's like the most versatile. Even a 35-pound kettlebell you can destroy yourself with if you do it right. So I think it's a really good thing, and it's so portable. You can throw it in the back of a car and go anywhere. Awesome.
Now, the question of the show, what is the best advice you have for becoming a better human? This is 100% open-ended.
So my wife and I were talking yesterday, and she's in training to be a therapist, and both of us have been in therapy off and on for a long time. And we've been married over 16 years, and I would say in general our marriage has gotten better and better. I have a 13-year-old and 10-year-old. A lot of times, we get asked like, well, how do you be a better parent, or how do you make your marriage better? Or do you have any tips on like parenting or like a good book to read? And I feel like the only thing you can do is become a better version of yourself. And what I found is like, the more I try to be a better parent or be a better husband or be a better business person, the more like I feel like I'm just white knuckling it. And it usually doesn't have the results I want. Where the more that I focus on just becoming the best version of me that I possibly can and not worrying about other people, the better husband I become, the better father I become, the better friend I become, like the better at everything I become. So for me, the best advice for becoming a better human is to just become a better version of yourself. And and again, I'm talking internally, believing the truth about yourself, understanding why you do the things that you do, paying attention to your thoughts and emotions, and scrutinizing where they come from and why you believe the things that you believe, and not worrying so much about the people around you, is how you actually get to take care of them the best way. So that's my advice.
How much I agree with that answer is unreal. All right, Tim, what's the best place for people to learn more about you and what you're doing?
So runningdownadream.com is the clearinghouse for pretty much everything I do. That's where you can find out more about the book Running Down a Dream as well. And I'll be starting my own Running Down a Dream podcast there in the next couple weeks.
Awesome. Well, that's exciting. We will link to all of that in the show notes. Tim, it has been a blast. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Your best. Losers always whine about their best.